Hello, world, and welcome back to Practicing Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. My name is Sarah, and I'm here with my friend Lizelle. And today we're talking about episode 10, which is going to cover the vast topic of consciousness. So I'm going to pass it over to Lizelle to get us started with Plato again.
Hello, world. I read this passage this morning again, and I thought, again, relevant. It kind of, to me, it sounded like that whole, not the courtroom of argument, but the courtyard of dialogos. And I thought, it's also, I think, our attitude here. So Socrates speaking. I think, Gorgias, that like myself, you have had much experience in discussions and must have observed that speakers can seldom define the topic of debate, and other mutual instructions and enlightenment bring the meeting to a close. But if they are in dispute, and one insists that the other's statements are incorrect or obscure, they grow angry and imagine their opponents speak with malice towards them, being more anxious for verbal victory than to investigate the subject under discussion. And finally, some of them part in the most disgraceful fashion, after uttering and listening to such abusive language that their audience are disgusted with themselves for having deigned to give ear to such fellows. Now, why do I say this? Because it seems to me what you are now saying is not quite consistent or in tune with what you said at first about rhetoric. But I am afraid to cross-examine you, for fear you might think my pertinacity is directed against you, and not to the clarification of the matter in question. Now, if you are the same kind of man as I am, I should be glad to question you. If not, I will let you alone. And what kind of man am I? One of those who would gladly be refuted if anything I say is not true, and would gladly refute another who says what is not true, but would be no less happy to be refuted myself than to refute, for I consider that a greater benefit, inasmuch as it is a greater boon to be delivered from the worst of evils oneself than to deliver another. And I believe there is no worse evil for a man than a false opinion about the subject of our present discussion. If you then are the same kind of man as I am, let us continue. But if you feel that we should drop the matter, then let us say goodbye to the argument and dismiss it.
So, yeah, I like that. It kind of brings me to think about how the point of science is to prove one wrong. The point of the experiment is to prove yourself wrong on your hypothesis. So, yeah, in the spirit of Socrates, I imagine.
Yeah. The willingness to be refuted.
Yeah. So we have this big question about what is consciousness. There's a couple of things that we were going to mention, I think, to kind of lead us into a summary by John.
Yes. So the first thing I want to mention is after awakening from the meaning crisis, he did a whole series because he mentioned here that consciousness is often referred to as the hard problem of consciousness, and he mentions the man who said that originally. I can't remember his name. And Schopenhauer referred to it as the world knot of consciousness or something like that. He has a series Untangling the World Knot of Consciousness with Greg Henriquez. It's on his channel. It's part of a cognitive science show. He's really, they really go into depth there. So if you really want to go down this rabbit hole of consciousness, I highly recommend having a look at this Untangling the World Knot of Consciousness with Greg Henriquez. Yeah.
I might have to delay my entry into that portal.
I have exactly the same feeling because I also want to watch The Elusive Eye again, but it's like there's just so much, right? And
yeah, it's like Plato, the allegory of the cave, and like you're leaving the cave, but it's too bright, and so you have to turn away because it's like, whoa, that's a lot. Hold on, I need to process what I've already got here. So yeah, it's funny.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good allegory, yeah, because our eyes are adjusting to the light. That's what's
Mhm.
happening to us. Our eyes are just. And later, when I speak about one of these books, I'm gonna remind me of this allegory because it's also relevant there.
Okay, cool. So we mentioned the other series, and now there's this summary that kind of starts around 26 minute 26 seconds.
Yeah.
26.
So first, John mentions that there's two sides to this question: what is consciousness? It's the nature of consciousness, so literally, what is consciousness? And then there's the function of consciousness. What do they do? And we should be careful not to just automatically confuse the two with each other. And I think if I'm hearing this episode correctly, he focuses more on the function of consciousness, and because he says like, yeah, we all know it's a great mystery. What is consciousness? It's like talking about God, but we don't really realize we also actually have no clue what consciousness does. And then he talks a lot, and then by minute 26 minutes 26 seconds, he gets to what I consider a summary. And I thought maybe I'm a big person, big picture person. So for me, I like to get the big picture first and then go into the detail.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to read that then. This is what consciousness is doing for you. It's doing it right now. All of this is the way that consciousness is helping you zero in on the relevant information. It's creating this textured salience landscape. It feels so nice, right? Textured salience landscape. You can almost feel it. So that certain things stand out for you, that forefronting, and other things don't as much. And it's constantly shifting dynamically. And within that, it's creating a presence landscape of how you and what's salient are being co-identified, coupled together into an agent arena relationship. And then it is also affording you, and this also is a dynamic, because the affordances are constantly shifting, it's affording you tracking. We know tracking now very well from after Socrates. Tracking the causal patterns, getting into deeper contact with the guts of the world. That's what consciousness is doing. So maybe we should just stop there.
Digest some of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is leading us into this idea of relevance realization. So this is starting the build up to fully understanding that term that he uses very often.
Yeah.
So consciousness helps us to zero in on relevant information. Is the one sentence I have to describe what consciousness does. But I do also have we're going to go deeper in with kind of theories and tests and experiments that have been used to develop, I guess, this idea of realization, relevance realization. But I do have that we're trying to solve the framing problem.
But then he also says put a pin in that.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's solved in this episode.
Okay. Pin in that one. All right. Well, in that case, do you want to jump into some of these words like salience landscape, presence landscape? Work through the experiments, like the theories, global workspace theory being the first one.
Yeah, let's do that. So we're jumping back now from minute 26 to somewhere around minute 10, I assume. Yeah. I'm not sure, because he gives quite a long intro on last time's discussions.
Yeah, exactly. So the sentence that he says that kind of brings me in that is, we do most things with no conscious awareness, and knowing and being are the same thing for this functional I guess, description of what consciousness is. With defining the terms, I kind of have it throughout. Throughout this discussion of the integrated theory, the global workspace theory, and some of the other scientists that he mentions.
Mm-hmm. So let's start with the global workspace theory, because I think that's the first one he goes into, right? The desktop idea.
Yeah, so this is by Bars.
Yeah, I've got the book.
Okay.
It's really so well written. Oh, there goes my pencil. It's so well written. It's such an easy read. I mean, if you look at the title, you think like, oh my God, but it's really not. It's quite a nice read. So not quite done with him, because I jumped to other books, but I'm not quite done with him, but I will get there.
Nice. I like it, the desktop relationship, like understanding it through this modern concept of your desktop on your computer. Yeah,
So that's very common. This dude does it also. John doesn't refer to him, and John differs from him in many respects, because the intelligibility of reality is very important to John, and not to this dude. So, but he also uses the desktop theory.
Okay, so his is just like a dead desktop.
No, the other guy is more like the desktop does not represent reality at all. It's icons that is kind of misleading, but it's misleading in the sense that it's so that we know how to, go around in the world. We are evolved for this. He uses our senses are evolved for this much of reality, and there's this much of reality, and it's not like we're necessarily evolved in the most accurate part of reality. It's just that, just what is best, easiest for us to survive. That's what we evolved into. So but apparently, because I'm both, of course, of these gentlemen, I highly value their opinions, and apparently there's one conversation which for some reason I haven't seen yet. I think I am just a little bit over Vervaeke at the moment, that they talk and they come to, well, actually we're saying the same thing, we're just saying it differently. So
the root of all argument.
Yeah. And it ends in some kind of Platonic vision.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Interesting. But in this global workspace theory, then what we're basically saying is that the desktop represents reality in this particular theory, or is that not true?
I think so, yeah. Okay. I think John is very much, I think John says like it's just we pick what aspects of reality is relevant. But it is aspects of reality.
Yeah, and like it's put on the desktop, and that way we have easy access to it, because not all the files can be active.
No. We've all had, especially in the beginning of computers, right? If too many files are open, no, it doesn't work.
Right. Okay. So that gives us a dynamic improvement on ability to zero in.
I like that word.
Yeah.
Help you zero in on the relevant information from the inside and from the outside, and from putting them together. So it helps you look at the information you have in your head, and it helps you look at the information in the world, and then it helps to put the two together. It reminds me of a lot of the practices that John is teaching in Awakening from the Meaning after Socrates. It's this whole letting different texts speak to each other.
Yeah.
That's basically what consciousness is then doing here automatically.
Yeah, because he was mentioning I have a vast supply of memory, a lot of things in my memory back here, and then there's an astronomical amount of information in the room that I'm in. So being able to put icons on the desktop, and these are the relevant files. That's kind of how this works.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. And that, I mean, you can see how that's agent arena interaction. And then there's a couple. So I think this is Bohr and Seth's theory of the integrated information theory, which is that the brain activity seems to correspond to consciousness. And so basically they were able to measure brain activity and how that related to, I guess, different levels of consciousness or consciousness itself. There, I guess this is where, we start looking at brain activity and how that relates with it.
I don't know. Is this the integrated information theory? Because I've got something else with the integrated information theory, and I think I've got someone else as well.
Okay, tell me what you've got, because my notes do tend
I
to.
didn't actually write the guy's name down.
Okay.
I think that Bohr and the people you mentioned, I think they're part of this whole global workspace theory thing.
Okay.
Because this book does go into the brain, how what happens in the brain, like when we're in different, as does this one. But so I think that belongs to, he's just further building on that argument there.
Okay, that makes sense, because arrows in my notes. So yeah, I probably wrote that later when it needed to be earlier. Okay, so but just the integrated information theory is going to be describing how powerfully integrated the brain is. And I think that's Tononi that describes
I think so too. Yeah.
the test to see how consciousness, by showing pictures, like pictures that don't make sense. He would show them pictures that don't make sense, people, I should say. And that is kind of like a Turing test, because it allows us to determine if information is relevant. So when people look at this picture, they're like, that doesn't look right, so it's not relevant. Or that's
yeah. I've got written, how good is something in making sense of the world, track the complexity of the world. I think it's related to what I think we're on the same
frequency.
We're on the same point now.
We're in the same flow. It's just a little obstructed. Okay. Cool. And then that's going to help us to describe if something's conscious.
Yeah. And what we need consciousness for here, he mentions, is complex situations that require insight, and new situations or novel situations require consciousness. If we just do something that's habitual, we don't necessarily need to be conscious for that.
Yeah.
I can't remember if it was with him or someone else that I read or heard about. There's a certain, if a cat, if you take like the frontal lobe away, they still live and they still hunt mice and do everything. It's like and successfully, it's not like we don't need this conscious part of our brain to perform. Neither do other animals, apparently. Yeah. But it was a long time ago that I heard that or read that. So, but I'm quite sure I remember it correctly.
Interesting. Yeah, because even when we get into a flow state where it no longer seems like you're as conscious, or you're in definitely a different state of consciousness when you're doing something repetitive. So this happens kind of unconsciously. And that was what he said in the beginning, is that a lot of things that we do unconsciously.
Yeah. But that's a different type of unconscious. And I think he will probably, because this book is also recommended for the next episode. But I do want to talk about it now because I'm super excited about it.
Yeah.
And that is parental. I always say it because there's no N in it. I always say parental, the side lobes.
Okay.
And that's when they go offline. That's when we get into the flow state. You lose your sense of self, because your sense of self is here. When this goes offline, you lose your critical thinking. So when the two of them go offline together, it's quite that's kind of, according to them, that's a state within which you have mystical experiences, or enlightenment. They call it enlightenment experiences. They do distinguish enlightenment experiences with a small e and enlightenment experiences with a big E. And that is when both of those go offline. And I did think of something like I'm just going to say it now. Let's just say it now. It's consciousness. This is super salient to me right now. So probably I'm bullshitting myself because apparently super salience is related to bullshit. But so when I was reading this, I was actually, two things made me really excited. The first thing is like, I often I have been quite harsh on myself in the past of my the years we spoke about the years and time and attention and energy I spent in religion as a teenager, but it 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 pruned me for enlightenment experiences actually, because what was happening is I now have the ability, which I didn't realize until I read that book, which is also great, right? Because know thyself, know how your operation manual works. So I'm learning that as well, and I think you have the same because you were also a seeker as a teenager, like because as a teenager your prefrontal cortex is still developing, so our brains developed with this ability to enter mystical states. It's I can also enter the flow state quite easily if this with this shutting down. I was thinking, oh, but I never experienced both of them shutting down at the same state. But like then I was like, yeah, but if you experience both of them shutting down at the same state, you're not gonna be aware of it. So that's why I can't recall instances of that. But I do remember, and I was privileged enough to spend some time with Layman Pascal when I was in Thunder Bay, and there was something about Dionysus that he told me. He said this ring made him think of Dionysus, and it really triggered something in me. Like I could feel this is transformative to what he's saying, but then I couldn't process what he was saying verbally, and I realize now what happened is my frontal lobe just shut off because I had this insightful experience, but my soul was like noticing, oh, something significant has been said now, but then this, and then of course I'm then like, usually what I then do is like, okay, no, shut it back on, because this is a very intelligent man you're talking to, and you have to try to be intelligent as well. I should stop doing that. I should just, if someone triggers my frontal lobe to shut off, I should just sit there and just enjoy the moment. So I loved reading this book. It really, really opened it gave me a lot of aha moments about how my own brain functions.
Nice.
So, and I'm sure yours as well, because like I said, we both have been seekers or spiritual since we were children. So we developed with this brain that is prone to mystical experiences.
Yeah, that's really funny because it just reminds me of Sagittarius again, because it's like seeking beyond, expanding beyond borders, this idea of higher education, foreign travel, philosophy. So these are all themes of Sagittarius too. So that was really cool. Yeah, and I can relate with that, needing to go straight into intellect. Like if somebody catches me, so I've been volunteering at this garden, and the lead gardener was telling me her life story and how she had been planting this seed. It was an heirloom seed. She'd been planting it for a long time, and recently has found her family because she was also adopted. And so she's going to visit them and, trying to create memories with her family that she's never met before. And she ends up going to this man's garden at his house because she saw that he had this seed that she's very interested in. And she goes to his place, and he asked her about a different plant that she had been growing, if she had ever grown it. And turns out the one that she had been growing was his grandfather's heirloom seed. So his grandfather had hybridized or developed, I guess you could say, this strain that she had been planting of this plant. So when she told me that, I was dumbfounded. I was like, that's synchronicity. That's crazy. And I couldn't, words wouldn't come out. But I did try to articulate that message to her of that. I love that when the plant medicine calls to people and connects people like that, the spirit of the plant. So yeah, I said it under my breath, and then I needed to repeat it to her because she was expecting kind of more of a technical, I think, response. So yeah.
Dumbfounded. That's because our intelligence kind of switch off, but it's dumbfounded is it's amazing space to be in. Just sometimes we should just let ourselves be dumbfounded.
Yeah. But we have to make propositions.
Okay. No, we shall escape that tyranny.
Here we are, practicing escaping the tyranny
of propositions by stuffing our head with a lot of knowledge.
Yeah, right. Real good approach.
Oh well, something's working.
Yeah, I mean, it's another situation too. I mean, just anytime we're discussing the episodes of becoming dumbfounded again in our preparation and going through it all by myself and writing stuff down, there are times where I'm like, I gotta repeat that, listen to that one more time, because you just dropped a wisdom bomb and you didn't even pause. So
that's mean, to drop a wisdom bomb and not pause, right. It's like,
at least take a moment.
But on the other hand, can you imagine how long all these episodes will be if he has to pause after every wisdom bomb? It was like, you will say something, pause, say something, pause.
Yeah, that's actually what I was thinking right when I was saying it. Was like, oh my god, there'd be like 50 more episodes. So
just to account for the non-candy spaces.
The non-candy space. You're jumping ahead.
Oh, sorry.
So we were talking about all of these different experiments. So we mentioned the global workspace theory, and then kind of mentioned some of the integrated information theory. And then that's Tononi, leading us into this kind of Turing test of consciousness. And then we actually wanted to mention Mateson and sizing up. And so what I have for that is that consciousness is creating a salience landscape for us. So this idea of sizing up is when he brings in this diagram. And I'm going to pause there for any reflection. Because I'm nice.
Yeah.
I guess this is for Mateson. We pick out features so that we can pay attention to everything. So we can't pay attention to everything in the room. We foreground some of it. And then he gets into this nice flow chart of framing problems, figurization, figure, foregrounding, and featurization. And I'll have that up on the screen.
Yeah. So he has the featurization, the foregrounding, the figuration, and the framing. And that all basically help us to get an optimal grip of the world. And the agent arena is being co-identified. It affords the agent arena to be co-identified.
Yeah,
and that I think is the presence landscape.
Presence landscape, yeah. So that word affordance was something that he kind of described a little bit. And he says affordance, and he's like going through a lot of different ways to describe affordance. He says about the cup, it is graspable. That's an affordance, a way of co-identifying that agent arena. And so he says also, this is walkable. And he's like looking at the floor. This is where I place things on the desk. And he finishes with, I'm a grasper. This is graspable. So all of that is kind of describing this idea of affordance. So I guess being able to look at things and determine my relationship to them and how I'm going to interact with them based on that relationship.
Mm. That's a good way to say it, yeah. And that's another t-shirt. I'm a grabber. This is grabbable.
I could get in trouble with that shirt.
Yeah, I didn't think about the this is grabbable part. That's also.
Oh, it's just the framing. All right. There is this little sentence here too. I'm not sure if this fits here. I might have to cut this part, but tracking correlation and causal patterns. And you really wanted to emphasize that word, causal patterns. Oh, I think that's about depth landscape though.
Yeah, but I'm already in depth landscape.
Good. Okay, cool.
Yeah. But I might have missed some things, but.
No, he just describes further how salience landscape is kind of taking us to presencing landscape through sizing up. And then we get from presence landscape to the depth landscape through this affordance network. And so, yeah, he talks about the spoon. A spoon is droppable. That's the causal pattern. I think you have a spoon too. But then, yeah, he goes straight into depth from there, depth landscape.
Yeah, the baby that's dropping, and his words, the causal patterns and the correlational patterns. I also have a feeling for us this is very significant to tracking his teaching on how we can discern causal patterns from correlational patterns, and deepening our skills of discerning or seeing causal patterns. Because he uses the example of a baby, so it's all these things just come so natural to us actually. And I loved at a certain point he said wisdom is basically growing up. I loved that, because when I read the book Quantum Change, I had a very almost depressive experience. Like, this is just basically growing up. Like, all these insights is just growing up. And now it's like, oh yeah, I was right. Like, because wisdom is basically just growing up. Mm-hmm. So now I feel less depressed.
So it worked. Yeah, this is interesting because, I live with my grandparents and my grandma's in the hospital now. And what I noticed, because it's like rites of passage, this wisdom that we gain. And I don't think that there's like any one way to do it, but what I'm noticing about my grandparents is they don't seem to have had an example for how to do this, like how to approach the abyss. Because I don't think it was something that was talked about. And so I'm starting to get to see it, and I'm starting, and it's, salient, because then I think about my mom and my parents and how am I going to go through this process. And it's like, it seems something that needs to be learned, something that needs to be some insight that needs to happen for them, for
cultivated. It needs to be cultivated.
And this is the thing that I'm struggling with, is I've seen like certain rituals that you do to lead people to death, to help them to understand or at least process it. And so, yeah, it's like, I don't have that wisdom. So how am I going to, be there with my grandparents? All I can do is observe.
Yeah. What came to mind when you were speaking now, although you went in a different direction at the end, so it feels like not completely relevant at the moment, but I do want to mention it. I read some articles that John recommended. I thought it was an Awakening, but I don't see it there. On wisdom and the normal what's it called? What people generally think. There's a term for that, but I can't remember it now. Is that the older, the wiser? But all the scientific evidence actually proves that that's not true. you have to actively cultivate wisdom if you want to grow old wisely,
Mm.
because things like openness, being high in openness, is very important for wisdom, and that tends to go down with age. People lose their openness to other experiences and others' points of view. And they have more life experience, so they can give general advice, maybe, but wisdom does not necessarily grow with age. It has to be cultivated on purpose.
Mm. That's interesting when you say on purpose, because yeah, that's what I feel like I'm doing with this practice of us cultivating the wisdom, and then I can distribute that as much as I can, because like I said, at this point it just seems like be an observer, and of course, like, there's no instructions for anybody that's approaching death, but I've watched my papa go through it, and now I'm watching my grandparents go through it, and there's terror, there's fear, and fear is because of ignorance. It's like, what's going to happen? What do I do to prepare for this? My body's shutting down. So yeah, that's what I mean, because we were talking about kids and growing up, and even when you reach adulthood, this is the whole point, is that adulthood is to being a sage what a child is being to an adult. So yeah, I see it.
And the beautiful thing about what you're going through now is you're actively cultivating wisdom through gaining knowledge and learning and opening yourself to new experiences and new insights. But you're also now gaining life experience, which is a very important part. Going through the death of a close person is such a valuable experience to undergo for cultivating wisdom. Because, I mean, who said it? Like, philosophy is basically preparing for death.
Yeah.
It's it is very important to know how to deal with death to be wise. So I'm really sorry that you're going through this, but I'm also grateful for your sake on that side. And I'm grateful also that you're capable of seeing this as a learning experience. That's
Thank you. That's nice. Yeah, it feels good to be observed. And yeah, because yeah, it's just not something that everybody's aware of, that's what the energy is. And I can read the energy, so I'm like, I know what's happening here. I don't think anybody's got a full grasp on it mentally. So yeah, we're getting there though. Okay. So on children receiving an insight, we go back to Piaget, the great psychologist and biologist. I was delighted to learn.
I had to think of you when he said that.
Yeah, so. I was excited. So he's got this experiment, Piaget, with 5 candies, and he lays them out for the children in a way that the top line, or one set is closer together and then the other set are further apart, but it's the same number of candies. It's 5 candies. It's just that the one row with the larger spaces in between it looks bigger to a kid of a certain age, so they're going to select that one for which 4 years old. Want. Yeah, 4 years old, and which one do you want? And so they're gonna consistently choose the one that has more space in between, because it looks like it takes up more space and therefore seems like it's a bigger amount. But he's saying that as adults, we know that the no candy space is not relevant to our decision. Like that no candy space. And so that is actually an error. That was the nice thing about the way Piaget ran some of his experiments, was focusing on what the error was about. What's the constraints that the child is operating under to make them select the one with more space in between. So the quote that I have here is, a pattern in the errors. If the mistake shows a pattern, then there are constraints operating in the child's cognition.
I like those words, a pattern in the errors. It sounds like it could be a movie, right? A pattern in the errors.
Yeah, actually it does. Some forensic deep investigation. Yeah, because he says that maybe we can understand development by how kids shift this cognition or have like this shift in their cognition. Because
Yeah.
basically, I guess he's relating it to an insight. Once you have surpassed that understanding that more space doesn't actually mean more candies. So there's like an insight here, and it's just going to completely transform their way of thinking.
Yeah, he speaks of the systematic insight. I'm not sure if I'm jumping ahead now, but it's the systematic insight that transforms this. It's not just like they now have insight in these 2 rows of candy. It's like open spaces don't matter, like type. And then maybe we need to unlearn that, because open spaces do matter.
Yeah, especially when you pay attention to them. Yeah, that
like I
actually,
said before.
What was that?
Like I said before we started recording, like he talks about the patterns the child is by understanding, getting a deep kind of understanding by dropping the spoon, not in words but in interactions here. As a child, you learn this pattern in dropping the spoon. As an adult, you learn something else. And as a sage, maybe you learn there is no spoon.
Yes, the spoon is not real. I am the spoon. Which, okay, so that's good, because we just skipped over this one little thing that I wanted to mention, which was the super salience. This so saying that this super salience triggers bullshitting, but changing the salience landscape, we don't fall prey to the illusion anymore.
Yeah.
So it's all part of training our salience landscape.
This does cause me great depredation. Is that a word?
So
because I can see myself making choices on what is super salient for me. And then, so my conclusion should then be, oh, I'm bullshitting myself. Right?
Yeah, right. Anytime you reach that salience, and then you're like, but, well, if that's the case, then maybe I'm bullshitting myself.
Yeah.
I'm lucky to be an astrologer, because people will point that out to me all the time. So I'm constantly getting checked on that. Just got to believe what I believe.
Playing the fool.
It's a fun game.
Yeah. No, I'm not bullshitting myself. I'm playing the fool.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm completely clear that my frames are jazzy and bedazzled. So yeah, that system of errors, that nice little cross diagram that he shows, where the arrows are going around the square, and that's showing that it's not just a frame shift, it's a complete landscape shift.
Yeah.
And
you don't just change what you see, you change your way of seeing. The whole system of errors fall away. What came up for me here is like how naturally it happens in children, from child to adult. So you would think it should happen naturally from adult to sage, but apparently it doesn't.
It's a little bit more friction to get from adult to sage. Well, that's interesting, because it kind of makes me think of the Fool again, and how there's 2 different Fools in the tarot deck. That can be either the 0 card or it can be the 22. And it's like the learned Fool, and the learned Fool is wise and has that, you've said it before, it's like, that you could have a rug pull moment. And so to be able to face it, knowing that there's going to be a rug pull around every corner, that takes a different kind of courage. Where kids, it's just like curiosity. With adults, it takes bravery, strength, and all the things. Or altered states. I think that's where we're going next. Yeah, so altered states, what makes between altered states and higher states of consciousness, what makes one an illusion and the other one insightful?
Yes, that is the question.
That is the question. Because he's saying with higher states, people will have this kind of insight and think, oh, that was really real. And everything else is not real. And so it's like, why is that the case with higher states when with altered states, for instance, he mentions dreaming, like we know when a dream wasn't real. And so, when we apply that to our life, what we learn from the dream, it's to say that life is real, the dream is a message or whatever. Whereas with higher states, when people enter into the higher states, they feel like that's really real, and then they transform their entire life based on that, and there have been documented transformations. So the truth is that people actually do transform from the higher state. So why is it the case that we can do that?
Yeah, because the thing he says here is realness is something like the pattern of intelligibility with the widest scope, wide and rich coherence of content. It makes the most sense of what is of the most of your experience. So that's why we reject the dream, because it doesn't fit into this pattern of intelligibility. But these higher states also doesn't fit into the pattern of intelligibility that we have developed up until that point in our existence. And yet we choose to accept that as more real than everything else. Like, it doesn't really make sense. So you would think that is bullshitting yourself. But he says, like, the thing is, people do actually have better lives often after these things.
Yeah, that's so. It's because I had an experience, is what he said, that the people will say. It's like, I'm doing this because I had an experience and it changed my life. Now this is my story. And like, that's such an Instagrammable like quote, my life changed in this one moment. It's like, really? Did it? But yeah, I mean, it does.
Yeah. And that, because I think I jumped this, the ontonormativity.
Right.
That is the problem. It's the
the
ontonormativity. So onto the structure of reality and normativity placing demand to improve. So the structure, getting into contact with the real structure of reality, places a demand on us to improve. But how do we know that the structure of reality that we encountered in this altered state of consciousness is really real?
Yeah, and he has a little, I think this is like an aside, but when we come out of the dream, the pattern to life does not cohere. So there's this question of coherence with the higher states too, of, how does that cohere with my normal waking life?
Yeah.
So this problem of ontonormativity is that question of, is it really real and does it conform to what's really real?
Is it really real, and do I conform, or how can I conform to what is really real?
Nice. Yeah, that's an important adjustment to that.
And that's like we said before we started recording. I remember when we talked about ontonormativity in a previous episode, I made, without knowing why, I mentioned, like, imagine feeling like that. I have no idea how that feels to actually experience ontonormativity. But when I was watching this, I realized why. It's because of all our rock pools. It's because of all the different versions of reality that we've seen. It's like, okay, so which one do I conform to? It's do I choose? So that's kind of where I am now. Maybe I should choose and commit myself to one really real version of reality.
Yeah,
I don't know.
That's funny, because this is kind of a debate that I was having amidst my mental breakdown, where I have 2 of the 7 sacraments from the Catholic religion. And so I went to my mom and I was like, okay, what's the third one? Let me get it. I'm going to collect them all. And it was confirmation where you denounce all of the religions except Catholicism. And I was like, I can't do that. And she was like, you don't have to. So, but yeah, it's like that seemed like, okay, this is an exit ramp for my soul. You know, my mom's going to secure her place in heaven if her daughter will go through all the rest of the 7 sacraments or whatever. So yeah, it seemed like it does seem, it's hard to be really general about all of the world religions. Like, it seems like you have to stick to a certain path in order for it to work right. It's like, no, like you need to do all these things and this, because that's how they structured it and this works. Whereas like, oh, let me just take a little from here, a little from here, and like mix them all together. Maybe that works too. But I don't know how the generalist path is coherent, if I can use that word, or, you know, how it's cohesive. Yeah, like there seems to be something from where the insight comes from, and like following that path, following wherever the patterns or the signs are popping up for you. And I think that's kind of how the ontonormativity thing doesn't seem like such a big issue, because it's, oh, I lost my train of thought there. It's almost like I'm expecting a rug pull. And so like you're saying, like, you know, nothing is real. Everything can change. The relevance can change immediately with just like a change of event. Something can happen, you know, and then my reality is completely different. I was watching this woman, actually, this physicist, talk about losing her husband to cancer. And she knows time, you know, she knows what time actually is as a physicist. And she was like, all of time exists at the same time. So he's still here holding my hand. And, you know, but there's still this like weird, how do I understand that? How do I live with that? How do I incorporate that? And her whole world changed when her husband died. And so she's, you know, living a different life, but at the same time, it's all happening at the same time. So it was like a real brain bender, but yeah, it's kind of where my mind goes with that.
It's so funny you mentioned that, because I was just, this week I was thinking of, because that's my view of time as well. I didn't know it was the scientific view, that all of time exists at the same, it's all existing at the same time. Like, time is not the right word, but time isn't really, so everything exists. Like, so I was thinking, in that sense, Jesus is still alive. He's just not alive in 2023. But that's our understanding of time. That's not, yeah. So the structure of reality keeps changing. That's the problem with ontonormativity.
Exactly. Who are you talking to? What perspective is it coming from? Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a problem just as severe as consciousness.
Yeah. One hard problem at a time, thank you.
You've thrown 3 at us in this episode.
Okay, to be fair to John, we just threw this one at ourselves. He didn't throw it at us.
But it started with him.
Yeah. It's because he didn't pause long enough.
Right. There's a lot in this pause. The space between the candies. Oh, my mind is like grabbing all kinds of patterns too, just while we're going on our asides and stuff. It's a lot of fun. Not things that I can necessarily articulate, which is exactly what he talks about with higher states. It's like you can't articulate what's happening, but you know it's real. So
his word is traditionally ineffable.
Yep.
Transrational.
Yeah, I wrote that too very sloppily. Okay. There was 2 books that I have here that you wanted to go into just before the awakening experiences, I think.
Well, I already talked about this one. I wanted to talk about this one, but I couldn't help myself. I was just too enthusiastic about this book. Really, really fun book to read as well. Really fun book to read. And then this one, but I'm gonna read it on my way to Austin.
Okay, sweet.
I always take a certain book when I do my travels. And then he mentions this book, but he doesn't actually go into it. But like I told you before, it was the perfect time for me to read it. She's got a real good sense of humor. So nice in that as well. Yeah.
Okay. Did we leave anything out before getting into cog-sci?
No, I think that is my next line. Like
Okay.
the describe and prescribe, you mean?
Yep, exactly. So because there are people whose lives actually do get better by all kinds of measures, then he says that there's two explanations for this, which are descriptive accounts and prescriptive accounts.
Mm-hmm.
So with descriptive accounts, he talks about underlying processes like the cognitive processes, the neuroscientific, the information processing, which is kind of like machine learning and AI.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that explains the experiential nature. Why does it feel more real in these higher states?
Mm-hmm.
And there's plausible integration, he says. So that's what I have for descriptive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is basically cognitive science, taking these different fields and integrating them. So he's basically saying we're going to look at cognitive science to find a descriptive way of what is happening here.
Okay. Nice.
And then based from what he describes, he thinks he will be able to show, and I totally believe him, that there's rational justification for trusting this higher states of consciousness. Not, again, he emphasizes not the propositions that you get in these, but the contact with deeper reality that you make within these altered states. That can transform you.
That's exciting because, yeah, he's asking questions like, is it legit? Is it justifiable? And usually, the scientists are like, no, it's not rational. No, it's not justifiable. And here we're like, let's explore.
Yeah. And then it's that sentence that we both have. What changed in the child, and hence should change in the adult to become a sage, is not only knowledge, the change is wisdom. The child has learned to see through illusion and into reality. And that's a deep longing, right? To be able to see into reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and it seems to change as you go from adult to sage. But I'm not sure how. Because I was like using the idea of curiosity is what leads the child to being an adult, and then courage is what leads the adult to being a sage.
Wonder, maybe.
Wonder.
Because Socrates famously said philosophy begins in wonder. So, and curiosity and wonder is linked. Yeah. So if it's curiosity that leads the child into adulthood, maybe it's wonder that leads the adult into sagedom.
I like that because it's almost wandering, wonder. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really nice word.
Yeah. And then he basically, I wrote it as we are entities that have to realize relevance, pursue salience, deal with existential anxiety, cultivate significance and meaning, try to overcome our illusions and delusions, and find a fullness of being and an optimal grip on the world. And the beautiful thing about consciousness, whatever it is consciousness affords us all of these.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank God for consciousness.
Yeah. It's fun. I like it.
Yeah.
Like I said, you won't give it up, right? There's no way that people. I had an experience that it's ineffable, but when I think of it, I think of it as a state of complete unconsciousness, but while I was conscious. It was awesome. It was like being dead. I loved it. I wouldn't have come back if it wasn't for a friend of me that literally called me back. So I can also see why losing consciousness could also be beautiful.
Yeah.
But
It's interesting because there's the DMT molecule, which is said to be, I guess, released in a greater amount as you die or when you die. And so this is something that Joe Rogan talks about a lot. It's like the big running joke of, have you ever tried DMT? And it is, I mean, with DMT, you can either kind of stay in this purgatory state or you blast off and you just go to like a completely different dimension. And yeah, there's no way to describe the things that you experience. Everybody talks about different entities that they experience, like there'll be gnomes or there'll be fairies or just other things that you come into contact with. And then that leaves you wondering when you come back, yeah, was that real? Like what part of that was real? Are those gremlins always with me? So, but you get something else from it. And in my situation, it was an understanding of the care and the nurturing that my mom gives me. And it was like, blasting off, but then being brought back down to earth in a sheet that was carried by angels and just gently being laid down onto like a water, like a pond or something. And when I came to, I was crying. And these experiences, they only last like a brief period of time, but I came to and I was sobbing because the message that had been given to me was something to do with my mom. And I just realized how I'd been not in relationship with her. So yeah, that's kind of what I get from those kinds of psychedelic experiences or any kind of experience of altered state is incorporating that into your life. Okay, what does that mean in the, reality? It doesn't necessarily that was real, but it's like there's a message in there. There's a pattern in there. Something from my subconscious came up. So what was that and how can I incorporate that?
That is the question.
Because I can't talk about it. Like I can't describe it, And I think this is the interesting thing about this whole series is that when you're tapping on the cup, you realize like there's no, he's giving us the vocabulary to talk about this kind of stuff, but that vocabulary wasn't there because it was never discussed. What is the mind doing? Why does the mind do what it's doing? And how do I not, tell it in order what to do? How is it doing all of that on its own? How is it sorting information?
That's what I love about John. He's giving us the vocabulary to figure out what the hell is going on with us. That is the tools to figure out what's like. I think Holly might sometimes think that I'm a little bit too dependent on the teacher, but he's structuring what I'm learning from within. That's what I feel he's doing. He's helping me to understand what I'm learning from within, what I'm going through. That is his role. He doesn't really teach propositions. He teaches you your manual, your operating manual. That's what John is teaching. Who are you? How does your operating manual work? That's what John is teaching. He's not teaching you believe in this, or even in After Socrates, which he does take on a more preacher vibe, but he's teaching how to best make use of this systems that we have. That's what he's teaching. And then by using Socrates as the main example.
I just appreciate when I was studying biology, it's like you study animal behavior, comparative animal behavior. These animals do this kind of thing, whether it's polyamorous or polygynous or, like you study their behavior and then you can kind of apply that to human behavior in some instances, not always, but we personify it anyways. Anytime we think about animals, we're trying to like understand from our perspective why they would do the things that they do. So I appreciate the framing of, well, how did early humans, as we know them, develop what we've got now? The infrastructure, the banking system, the, subdivisions that we live in. Like, why do we do all this? And you get an understanding of that when you look back. yeah, there's like, now I'm starting to understand humans a lot more. With biology, I was understanding biology, life itself, all the kingdoms, and that's like a vast amount of information, way too much to try to condense. And so there's like this separate segment of it that now I'm learning about, which is kind of an extension of the biology, and that's this cognitive science. Because what I'm gathering is that biology is a part of cognitive science too, with cognitive
There's
science
probably,
being, yeah, because it's like a umbrella kind of topic.
yeah. I had to think of Aristotle in his books. When you refer to biology being too vast, he would have just handed you a couple of his books, like, yeah, I wrote on that. I wrote on that.
Vast, silly girl. Yeah, that's, I mean, what an interesting thing to decide to do is like, let me categorize so that I can understand things better.
Yeah.
Have the
Well,
words
we're
right.
smashing things apart to understand them better. Maybe categorization is not such a bad idea.
Yeah, right. It takes me back to gestalt and features.
Indeed. Did you notice in After Socrates, John mentions that when he talked about Aristotle's view of the forms, that wasn't quite right. And I was like, yes, because when he got to Aristotle and said, okay, this is what it means, I was like, there goes the little bit of understanding that I had is now like, I must have interpreted too mystically. So I'm really glad that he said it's not exactly what Plato meant. So I'm like, okay, so maybe I'm on the right track.
Yeah, I caught the error. So,
yeah.
Did we leave anything out that you can think of?
I don't think so. I think we covered basically everything. This was, for me personally, very, especially the books that he recommended and I read, was very insightful in knowing myself. And that is just great. And a big thank you to John for helping me to know myself. It's amazing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. All the nice resources.
Yes.
Okay, I think that means you're taking us out.
I do have a quote. Shall I read the quote?
Yeah.
It's from this book. It's the ending of the second part. So just before he tells you how do you actually become enlightened? Seek enlightenment, big E or small e. So the small e enlightenment is those little moments that you get deep insight, and the big E is the complete transformation of your being. Seek enlightenment because the new beliefs you form will create more inner peace and greater cooperation with everyone you meet. And maybe, just maybe, as you venture from Plato's cave of ignorance, others might follow your path.
Nice. I hope they know where to stop on the way out. All the stops you got to make. Or when the sun's too bright, we got to put a stop.
Be careful of the light.
Yeah. It's bright out here. Like, pack your sunglasses. Awesome. Yeah. Well, that was great. And I think we completely understand consciousness, what it does. So we're good. We don't have to cover that anymore. Expert.
No, I'm going to have to watch the series with Greg again.
With Greg, yeah. Oh. All right. I'm getting delayed. So we will wrap it up there. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks to talk about episode 11. So we hope to see you then.
Higher states of consciousness.
Higher states of consciousness. And also join us for After Socrates on Sundays at noon Eastern, where it's the Stoa After Socrates. I'll get that right one day. Where we meet at the Stoa and talk about the new series After Socrates by John Vervaeke. So we hope to see you there too. Bye, everyone.